Hello guys, it's been a while. Came back from Thailand, amazing experience and ready to carry on with these lectures. Today I just want to teach you how to play against absolutely the high scoring rate that line has against Sicilian. Can you believe it? And it only occurs in 6 or 7 percent of the game that are played online. Amongst top players, only 4% of the game. And finally, on my level, I get like 8% of these games with this line. I'm talking about the Chekhover line. And I just have to tell you honestly, I hate this line very much. Actually, I used to hate it until I learned it. And it's so annoying because it's so simple for playing with white pieces. Usually these anti-Sicilian guys, they know their anti-Sicilian systems. We just don't pay attention, or we can simply not pay attention on every single system like in same fashion. And just because of that, we need to know the main plan. So this lecture is gonna be how to treat these type of positions and what to do. It's not about like what are you supposed to, I don't know, remember all these concrete lines and variations. So I'm just going to teach you and to give you like a very nice, brief, but at the same time simplified ways of how to treat the Chekhover system. Let's go. So it begins after e4, c5, knight f3, d6. So it's good for neither players, dragon players, rouser players, and Scheveningen guys. After like d4, we take and they just capture big queen. Just like I said, it's fairly easy for playing because once they play queen takes d4, they know their plan. Sometimes it's positional, sometimes it's attacking, but in general, white has a very simple ideas and plans in these games. I'm going to teach you to play with knight c6. You know, I played a couple of tournament games as well with a6 because one of the main ideas of the Chekhover system and the system with the queen d4 is when you play knight c6 is to play bishop b5. And for some reason in the past, when I simply didn't like and didn't want to pay attention and study this variation for black, I said, okay, I'm going to avoid this and I'm just going to play a6. And that's completely different type of the game, and there is a game between Magnus Carlsen and Gavain Jones where Magnus was white and won the game. I also played it twice with white pieces in tournament chess, and after a6, killer line is h3, knight c6, queen goes to e3, and when you play g6, they go c4, knight f6, knight c3, bishop g7, bishop e2, castles, castles, and white in this position goes with rook on b1, play b4 while the rook goes on d1. And these positions are considered to be slightly but a long-lasting and a long-term better for white. And because of that, I believe that way better against Chekhover system is knight c6. When you play knight c6, they will go with bishop b5. I just want to tell you that lately, even amongst top players, they just adopted this system to avoid long theoretical discussions, and they just go with some queen to e3 ideas. When they do that, you go g6, you want to play bishop g7, bishop e2, bishop g7, castles, knight f6, h3 sooner or later, and if they play rook to d1, all you have to remember is bishop to e6. You know it from the dragon. Once the knight is not on d4, you always go with this bishop on e6. If knight c3, rook c8, they can't play e5. Simply on e5, you just play knight to e8. While you want to revert your knight back to d7 and play like this. e5 is nothing because you just go back with the knight on e8 and you're just answering their threats. So because of this, I don't think queen e3 is going to be played. Everybody who plays Chekhover line will be going with the bishop b5. Then you play bishop d7. Here, you threaten the queen, so they gotta take it. But there are guys who play and retreat the queen back to d3. I remember I used to coach Grandmaster Milan Zajic, and I taught him to play this variation with white pieces. I just told him this is a hyper solid game for white. You can just go with this, and then he beat Grandmaster Alexander Kovacevic with this queen to d3. Speaking of the queen d3, it's nothing so special. You just go g6, bishop g7, knight f6, and of course they won't take on c6 till you play a6. You play a6, they go h3 to avoid, for example, knight g4, knight e5. They take, you take, and all you have to remember in these positions is that you're not afraid to lose the light square bishop, so you play queen to b6. It's a very nice move. You put some pressure against the knight on d4. You now probably want to move the knight back to d7 and go with some kinds of things like that. So they can play bishop e3 because of queen takes b2, and your game just looks pretty good. I believe the most common thing is rook d1 in these positions. Then you reroute your knight back to d7, and this is what you have to remember. So you don't have to worry about a light square bishop. Your knight goes back to d7, and you open up the bishop on g7, pressure the knight on d4, while your knight can go on both e5 and c5. Rerouting the knight on d7 in these positions is one of the crucial things in this type of games. Okay, we've just seen what's happening in the trendy queen d3 line, and I once again have to say that I expect those who play Chekhover line to go with bishop c6. And by the way, that bishop takes e6, bishop c6, they all go with the knight c3. Here, we once again have deviation. They can go with c4, and it's considered to be absolutely fine. You just have to know two things. First thing is break immediately, because you got a bishop pair, so you got to show, you know, like a tendency of opening up the game. So when they take, you don't take on f3, even you'll find somewhere in literature, take it, don't do it. Play queen a5, get the pawn back, and when they play short castle e5 and queen e3, they want to win the bishop pair back. They want to play knight e4, they want to take advantage of the king, and this is where you have to play bishop e7. You don't need to know anything else. You have the bishop pair, you keep it, you prevent knight e4, you want to play knight f6 followed by short castle. Black is absolutely fine. Even if they manage to do, for example, Rook E1, this and knight e4, you can play, for example, queen h5, take like this, and you absolutely have a nice game. Point is that they can play c5. That's what I get in one of my games. You play d5, and when they get the pawn, you just say, buddy, I play king d7. What are you going to do with the pawn on c5? You're going to defend it. Okay, but I'll play this one. You want to play a4? Okay, but I'll play rook h to b8, going after this, knight g4, and so many other things. Rook b4, doubling these rooks on the b file, and black has a great initiative in this queenless middle game. That's why you just have to remember that c4 should be broken by f5, playing queen a5 check and recapturing by queen on f5, kicking the queen away with e5, and then playing bishop e7. Nothing else but this. And finally, we're reaching the main position with the knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5, e6, long castles, bishop e7. I gotta stop here, because this is as Russians used to say, tabia position, which means a critical position, crossroad of many other possibilities, and basically this is the moment of the game where white has a couple of different plans. First of all, I have to tell you, why is this system so dangerous and so annoying throughout all these years for black players? First of all, because that queen on d4, altogether with a rook on d1 and annoying bishop on g5, makes pressure on both knight on f6 and pawn on d6. So we always have to consider some bishop f6 captures, and we never know if it works or not. After this lecture and this video, you're gonna know it. Second thing, they can put a queen back on both d3 and d2. If they do it on d3, they want to reposition, for example, the knight to d4, and do two kinds of plans. Either f3 g4, which is similar to English attack, or f4 h4, and do just the simple pawn storm on the king side. That's another thing. And third possibility is queen d2. I'm defending and overprotecting g5, bishop with the queen. I still want to play knight on d4 in these positions, while at the same time I'm avoiding with the king on b1 some queen a5 because of knight d5 jumps. So that's why simply white players shouldn't have so many problems with their plans. Even the most primitive ones, if they just analyzed and played one game like this, they will remember that they gotta move the queen, put the knight on d4 and push like this. On top of all that, you gotta always flirt with the white's ideas coped with e5. And that's another thing that we always have to know how to react. So let me just briefly show you what to do against these systems. Probably the worst is just bishop f6. If you take g takes f6, pack your stuff, go home, go on Thailand, guys. Go there, swim there, get some sun, but don't play chess. Definitely, you always have to take by bishop. Taking by pawn is just a slow death for you. They will play queen somewhere, queen to d3 or d2, play knight d4, play f for f5, and this Rouser structure or Neidorff structure in this position turns out to be almost like killed by white with the plan that I just mentioned. So after bishop f6, you gotta take like this. And now you're gonna say, but Maya, don't they win the pawn? Yes, they do win the pawn. But you gotta know one thing. I played so many times on chess.com, took on c3 and took on e4. And then when my opponents went for knight e5, I always start panicking. Okay, here I won some games, I lost some games, I drew some games. But this position is absolutely fine for black. All you have to know is the next move. And with the next move is a nice position for you. So then I played one game, castle. Then I realized if I play castle, he's going to go with some sort of f3 and rook d7 or doubling these pieces or whatever. I can't play bishop g2 because they should take. And then I decided to finally check what am I supposed to do. A simple move here is rook c8. It's the whole point behind this pawn. We're threatening the pawn on c3, threatening to create a fast counter chances. But on top of all that, when they play like f3, we play bishop d5. They can't play c4, and that's the point of having this. Also, you're threatening to play not immediately king e7, but first f6 and then king e7, trapping up the rook on d6. And on c4, you just take, and in this endgame, we just even have to say that black is just a little bit better because we're up a pawn. So bishop f6 simply doesn't seem to be working. Another thing in this moment is queen to d3. We really have to understand why does someone put the queen back on d3 and what's really the point of this move. And that's why I'm here to explain you what's the point of queen to d3. When the queen goes back to d3, they want to go with the knight on d4. So because we know that they want to go with the queen, with the knight on d4, we just have to say, okay, but I watched that lecture by that crazy coach on YouTube, so you just go with queen a5. And he said, put the queen on a5, temporarily preventing knight d4 because bishop on g5 is just hanging. And we can talk about pros and cons about queen on d3 and queen on d2. One of the cons of queen on d3 is that the bishop on g5 is hanging once we play queen a5. So those who do queen to d3 against you, they want to play knight d4, and then you play queen a5 and say, get lost, baby. You won't be able to play knight d4 against me. Maya explained to us, queen a5. And that's what we play. So now you have so many systems. If they take on f6, take on d6, you take on c3, and you're better. If, for example, they go bishop h4, avoiding this, you play castle. Now they play knight d4, you play rook f2, e8, defending the bishop on e7 and setting up some knight e4 tricks. Of course, another rook goes on c8, and then you can just unleash the queenside action with b5. If they go with king b1, you just play cold-blooded castle, and now they have problems with Other possibilities. Once again, knight e4 doesn't work. They gotta defend it. They go h4. And anytime they do h4, just kick it away with h6. Now you would say, but okay, many times we saw that the guys will just play g4 like this and they will sack it. Okay, but we won't take it. So you just put a rook on d5, break, on d8, and you want to break with d5. Then you say, but what if they just played, for example, h4 immediately? Immediately h6. So any queen to d3, you move the queen to a5 to avoid and prevent knight e4. Any h4, you play h6 to immediately force them to decide whether they take, in which case we're fine, or to bring it back, in which case we go back with the queen on a6 because they threaten knight e5 here, or not immediately knight e5 because we threaten queen a2. So you can play like e5, the one that I like a lot, or queen a6, going into a position where you just have the bishop pair, and absolutely fine queenless middle game. You don't have any problems here. Also, pawn on e4 is hanging with the tempo, which is another thing. But I like more to play e5, fixing the possible weakness on e4. What do I mean by fixing the weakness? Now they play king b1. Now they obviously threaten knight e5 to go after the queen on a5. And you go queen a6. And after queen a6, b takes a6. I found so many games online like this. I found tournament games. There is a great tendency for black players to win these positions. Why? You got a bishop pair. You got to open C and B files, which is not something to be underestimated afterwards. And finally, e4 is hanging at a moment, and they got to deal with that weakness for the time being. And that's why we like this position so much, and that's why we're just saying black is just so much better. So it's not so much better. According to the engines, it's equal. But if I have to be honest, would I rather take white or black? I would always take black. And also there is a tendency, even according to the engines, with slight side inaccuracies immediately for black to be easily better. So that's what you need to remember about queen to d3. And finally, rook h to e1. So many guys go rook h to e1. You don't know if they want to play queen to d3. You don't know if they want to retreat the queen back to d2. You don't want to. You don't want to know. Not you don't want to know, but you actually don't know if they want to break with e5 or simply put a king on b1. After rook h to e1, you play castle. And there we go. It's time to discuss this position. So many possibilities here for white. I would begin with the worst one. Bishop f6. Bishop f6, queen d6. I won a pawn, says white. Nobody. You didn't win a pawn. I sacrificed the pawn to end up with the bishop pair, to threaten c3, to play rook d8 if you give me a chance. I'll show you a game of mine. It's a blitz game against an IM a few days ago. He played e5. I captured an f3. I played rook a d8, but I knew this line because I was studying one of my students the other day. Queen a3, bishop g5. Even if I didn't have bishop d2 at this point, even if I didn't have, I would prefer black because he's having so many weaknesses in the position. But of course, bishop d2 just wins an exchange and you win the game. So bishop f6 immediately doesn't seem to be working. Another weak move is queen d2. And here, you have to be very precise. It's one of those lines that you have to learn by heart. So I won't give you too many of these lines, but it's one of these that you just have to know. So what am I talking about? After queen d2, they defend the bishop on g5 and they want to go with the knight d4. If that's the case, you know that they want to play knight d4, immediately play h6 and ask them, buddy, what are you trying to do here? So if they're just impatient, unexperienced, and say, I saw somewhere that white is always attacking in these positions and simply sack on h6, you just say, thank you so much. I'm gladly going to take it and play a very nice defensive resource, a very standard defensive method, threatening bishop g5, simplifying your upper piece, and don't worry, you play king h8, rook g8, and you're just so much better. Another thing is bishop h4. I saw when I was younger, I saw a game between Serbian IM and nowadays Serbian GM, Nestorovic Arsovic, where the guy played 94. I simply, at that time, was like, what the hell is happening here? But you know, when these guys just play faster their moves, you immediately know that opponent is in some sort of analysis. Here, 94 just wins the opponent, basically wins easily the game. If you take on e7, take on d2. If you take on e4, take on h4. Very lovely, lovely thing in this situation. So, and if rook takes e4, you take bishop takes h4. And finally, if they play bishop f4, you have a very important move. Okay, they go after the d6 pawn. You gotta play e5, locking up the dark square bishop on g3, and then playing a very nice knight d7. Now, when you simply avoided all kinds of attacking possibilities by white on the king side, now you can launch them with b5, rook c8, queen a5, knight c5, and you can just launch the attack. A very simple attack on the queen side. So we've seen already bishop f6 and queen d2. Time to check queen to d3. Queen to d3. Aha, he wants to play knight d4. What did I explain you like 5 minutes ago? So the queen goes on a5, and he can't do it. He can't play knight d4 because g5 bishop is hanging. So what does he have to do? He has to defend it. They usually do this, and anytime they defend this bishop with h4, you just ask them, hey, decide what do you want to go for, what do you want to do with that bishop. So you play h6. They go back, they now threaten knight d5. Actually, not immediately, they want to play king b1 and knight d5. You just go back and take a look at the following plan. Knight d4, rook f c8. Why rook f c8? Because you want to bring the bishop back to e8, reposition your knight eventually via g4, d7 to e5, fantastic outpost for the knight, and do the pawn storm with the bishop pair with b5, b4, a5, and if you don't know what to do, just push these pawns like crazy and you're gonna be great. And finally, if in this situation they just play like e5. On e5, I chose for you a very simple approach. You take. If they take by queen, you play queen b6. If they go with knight e5, you exchange and play rook c8, defending and not allowing them to break your pawn structure, so it's equal. And finally, if you take and they go queen h4, threatening the queen on d8, you just say, okay, queen c7, and now they have to go with this, and now looks very, very dangerous and very, I'd say, promising for white. Don't worry, this is a well-known theoretical position, and you have two possibilities. I remember I was in Reykjavik, Iceland, 2008 or 9, and Grandmaster Mališauskas from Lithuania played against Van Gaal, 2750 at that time. And Van Gaal played rook c8. I didn't opt to show you this line, but I'm just going to mention this line for you, so if you like it, I'm just going to show you what to study. This guy played knight g4, pinning the knight on f6, pinning the bishop on e7, and when Van Gaal played knight d5, now knight d5 doesn't work, that's why you played rook c8. If knight d5, he would, if knight d5, you can easily capture by bishop, and there is a mating threat on c2, and that's why you played rook c8. And when Mališauskas took on d5, Van Gaal played a fantastic f6 move. That's a great defensive resource for black in these positions. And now they have knight h6, knight f6, so many other things. And that's why I didn't want to teach you something concrete. I just want to give you simple lines to play. So instead of rook c8, play rook f to d8, which is way more natural and easier for playing. They go knight g4, you take. You code knight g4. And that's why you took on d1. So when they take on e7, now your rook on d8 is not hanging. And the key move, here I have to mention my student Dejan Jovelic, famous soccer player. He played knight h6 in one of his games, like it was like 2 or 3 years ago, and he said, "Coach, look what I just done." And he was right. He just played this line for like 16 moves, and black is already better. And I believe that that game took its place on chess.com and he won. So just like you see, this is how you have to treat these e5 lines. And finally, if they just said, okay, I'm not going to do any of these. I'm just going to make an intermediary, logical move where I'm just improving my game with the king on b1 and keep all possibilities that I had previously. And then you say, okay, not a big deal. I'm going to go with h6. And I'm just going to ask you, what are you going to do with your bishop? If you take on f6, we now go queen b6, threatening on f2, threatening on b2 here. If e5, you play rook a d8. You always take on f3, and they just have broken pawn structure and so many weaknesses. Black is much better. So on h6, they gotta go with bishop on h4, and you have this strong move b5. This is why white's best bet was to probably go with something else, but not this king b1. And I definitely think that after you play b5, you're now showing them your intentions in this game. And it's to attack on the queen side. And that's why I like it, because as a dragon player, I like crazy positions. I like complications. I like to attack. If e5, even better. I'm going to take and hide my queen on b6 and support b4. If you now take on f6, not a big deal. I'm still going to go queen b6. I'm going to defend my bishop on c6. At some point, attack on f2. I'm threatening on c3. On any e5, I'll play rook a d8 and go with the bishop pair. If you go with queen b6, knight e5, I'm just going to go with b4, take here, and black is just a lot better. So if now I just have to do like a very fast recap of the main ideas of the system, what do I have to say? First, that those who play queen d4, we are just going to trade it with knight c6, not with a6. They will most likely go with the bishop b5. You play bishop d7. They will most likely take. If they don't take, you just go g6, bishop g7, knight f6, castle, and retreat your knight from f6 to d7 at some point. That's like a very simple. Variation. I just told you here queen b6, but anyways, you want to retreat your knight back to d7. If they want to go with something like a bishop c6, c4, just break it with f5, capture back with the queen, play e5, and here do this bishop e7. If they go with the knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5, e6, castles, bishop e7, here you have to remember, queen on d2, ask the bishop with h6 what to do. Queen on d3, he wants to play knight to d4, play queen a5. So queen on d2, you just play some h6. Queen on d3, you just play queen a5, not allowing them knight e4. Any h4, you always kick that bishop away with h6. Any bishop d2, you can always go with queen a6, but I like first e5 and then queen a6. And finally, even immediately bishop d2, I like d5, but I also like queen a6 as a principal reaction in these positions. Finally, any bishop f6, we're never afraid of this. Simply, we play this, and when they play knight e5, which looks way more dangerous than you may even imagine, you just go with a rook c8. And finally, if they go with a rook h2 e1, castles, now I already told you. Queen to d2, you play h6. Knight to d4, queen to d3, they want to play knight e4, play queen a5. On any queen a5, they go with h4 to defend the bishop and go knight e4, you play h6. And finally, if in this position, they just go with e5, you take, queen h4, queen c7, because queen was hanging, knight e5, play that simple rook f to d8 move. That's the thing. And finally, if they play king b1, always chase this bishop away with tempo. It can go back to f4. Shouldn't do anything good with on e3 because of knight g4 at some point. It has to go back to h4. If it takes on f6, you just take and you have a nice position. If it goes on h4, you just launch a queenside action. I believe this recap helped you just to remember these lines better. And I was just trying to give you like basic, like plans and ideas what to do in these positions. Hope that you enjoyed in this Chekhover lecture and how to finally learn to play against these systems, so we won't have any more problems against high scoring position online for white. Bye bye, guys.